In this episode of the Orthodox Ethos, we continue our discussion with Father Arsenios from the Holy Monastery of St. Arsenios, Halkidiki, Greece, on obedience which is pleasing to God. And we ask, in what way must we respond to secularization that is affecting parts of the Church today without harming the Church? And many bishops are pressuring priests to get. Can priests obey something that is trampling their conscience and the free will of man? And what exactly did St. Paisios say about? Did St. Paisios come to regret any of the things he said regarding the end times? And finally, we close with a message of encouragement regarding the future of Orthodoxy. I think we've laid a good foundation up to this point, but more specifically, I would like to focus further on some of the challenges our Orthodox people face overseas. Unofficially, we have here a growing request regarding the subject of obedience to bishops. More or less, we're being told to practice blind obedience. Sure, one may say that the erring positions of a bishop or a priest do not rest well in their conscience, but nevertheless, they must still be obedient. In other words, don't look at what they preach or do, but our responsibility is simply to bow our head down and obey, and say, may it be blessed. Of course, we understand and agree that this kind of treatment mainly applies to subjects unrelated to the faith and our salvation. One cannot insist on having their own will on non-salvific issues. You must simply say, may it be blessed. Neophytes may find it hard mustering the courage in applying discernment to say, enough, I'm not obeying anymore. There are also priests, especially those still early into their ministry, who fear and who say, how can my flock, which doesn't understand much of these things, resist the bishop? Where will they end up? Outside the church, in heresy and schism and schismatic communities. So my question, Father Arsenios, is, can we present anything other than the authentic patristic teaching on obedience just because we're afraid our listeners won't understand us, and rather keep them under-informed and in the dark? Basically, keeping them in a state of intentional ignorance because we don't trust that they will handle the responsibility correctly. And so they don't spiritually mature or grow much. I'm thinking of some bishops in America that are against those who support the application of holy disobedience in matters of salvation. In the best case scenario, you may have a bishop who acknowledges the truth but says, don't react because you'll end up mismanaging everything and making a mess. The least of best scenarios, they'll say, okay, we can manage, maybe disagree, but we shouldn't speak up against the erring decisions of the synods, bishops, or priests. So here's the great difficulty now. How do we apply a healthy form of disobedience, as St. Paisios used to teach, to counteract today's delusions and secular spirit, which are creeping into the church today, without being ruinous or negative, but instead build up and contribute positively with our stance, with our application of holy disobedience to help the church and not injure it. It's a bit challenging to relay what I mean. I hope you understand my sentiment.
Since we're talking about the church, let's begin by defining what the church is. The church is always expressed and represented by the saints. The administration of the church, the archbishops, the bishops, the patriarch, etc., represent the church only to the degree in which they themselves follow the Holy Fathers. obeying the Holy Scriptures, Holy Tradition, the Holy Canons. Only then do they truly represent the Church. If, however, they're not obeying Holy Tradition, the Ecumenical Councils, the Holy Scriptures, and despite their own disobedience, they dare demand blind obedience from the people, then there's an obvious problem here. What do we say in the salutations to the Theotokos? Rejoice, fold of the rational sheep. The Church's fold consists of rational sheep. We're not irrational sheep. Christ has granted us free will, and he does not violate it. I'm reminded of something from the life of Saint Simeon the Stylite. He was the first to exercise the type of asceticism of living and praying on a pillar, a column. Some critiqued and wondered, when he started doing this, what kind of delusion is this now? Climbing up columns? So in order to test him, they decided to tell him, all of us, including the bishop, think that you should come down now. And they said, if he climbs down, it means that he's not deluded, but if he follows his own will, we have a problem. So as soon as they told him to come down, he started to descend, and they knew right away that it was from God because of his humility. So then they responded, oh, it's okay, stay where you are after all. There's no need for you to come down. Even when we make reference to blind obedience, it needs to be understood under the correct criteria. For example, when Christ instructed Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham obeyed. But once God tested him, he said stop. Blind obedience can be understood in certain pastoral guidances, but not in matters of faith. But let's say an abbot wants to do some renovations and says to the engineer, we want to add a second story to this existing building. Say that we're building a monastery, a church, and it's debated whether a second story should be added or not. I don't want you to simply say, oh, may it be blessed. I want you to reply to me as an expert engineer whether I can add a second story or not. Do you understand now? In pastoral matters, since a spiritual father isn't usually dealing with heresy or immoral behavior, one can obey. But if your elder ends up trying to lead you into heresy or immorality, you'll say, my dear elder, I cannot do this. If you're a doctor or a mechanic, for example, you will share your knowledge of expertise in order to assist. Passively saying, let it be blessed, oh, let it be blessed, in such situations, when asked to provide insight in your field of expertise, is inappropriate. It's not the right attitude. Now, regarding our current subject of COVID-19 that we've been dealing with for 2 years now, some bishops say it's a medical issue. Since it's a medical issue, then why are you clergy involved in pressuring the faithful to do such and such? Personally, I believe that the issue isn't just medical, but also spiritual.
Could we ever say that there isn't a spiritual dimension to everything we do in life?
Of course not. Everything has a spiritual dimension, especially this particular subject. From the onset of this entire narrative, we've observed the way in which things have progressed, the coercion, the force, the fear-mongering, and so forth. Wherever force and fear dominates, the Spirit of God cannot abide there. How could we say that this is unrelated to our spiritual life the moment that our God-given free will is being violated? We have a globalist movement here trying to force us to do something against our will. If this isn't spiritual, then what is spiritual? This subject is spiritual and medical. I would actually say first and foremost spiritual and then medical. It's also social, financial, and so forth. We're witnessing the demolishment of our global economy. We're heading towards a financial collapse. Society in general is being eradicated. Let me ask, in the history of civilization, how has mankind differed from the animals? We are expressionate beings who display part of our inner world through our facial expressions. We laugh, we smile, we're saddened, we frown, qualities which are almost extinct today because we're persuaded to keep our faces covered wearing masks.
Especially in children.
Yes, especially in children. I heard a teacher saying to her students recently, please remove your masks, at least for once, so I can identify who my students are before the end of the school year.